Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 128 of the Veterinary Behaviour Chat podcast. So we've got a bit of a philosophical one coming up today, and there are a couple of reasons why this particular topic sort of popped into my mind. So we're going to talk today a little bit about safety and predictability, control, choice, and agency, all kind of big buzzwords within the veterinary space, or the veterinary behavior space in particular, or the behavior space in particular, I would say at the moment. But there are a couple of reasons that kind of these words seem more relevant and important to me right now. So I'm in Abu Dhabi. It's the 19th of March. So we have been under attack from Iran since the 28th of February. So just about 3 weeks now. And the whole idea of safety and predictability has taken on a whole new meaning for myself, my clinic, my team, the pets that live in our world, whether they're our own pets or whether they're our patients, my behavior cases, but also many, many other patients that we've seen that have been really affected by missile interceptions, loud bangs, in some cases kind of buildings shaking or the windows of buildings shaking. And it's been really interesting, not in a good way, to be living through this, in this, because it's also shown me how different individuals' responses to times of threat, and in particular, where some of our sort of most foundational needs, such as safety and predictability, are being rocked, how different behavioral responses have been, both within the humans around me as well as the animals around me. And it kind of really got me thinking about what it must be to live as a pet that doesn't have any safety or predictability, even when not living in a state of sort of international conflict or crisis, but just on an everyday basis, living in their homes, or in their environments without being able to have much influence on the world around them. So that's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit for the last few weeks. So this episode's going to air on the 31st of March. So hopefully, with any luck, maybe things will be looking a little bit clearer, but maybe also not. And so to kind of be living in a prolonged state of unpredictability, and with our sort of safety threatened is really quite debilitating. So imagine living like that over a lifetime. So those were some of the thoughts I had. I also then watched a very good colleague, the incredible Dr. Lisa Radosta. She also posted something about anxiety and predictability on her social media channel. And that kind of also reinforced kind of what I was already thinking about a little bit. And then finally, I had a call with a really great client of mine not so long ago. And these are probably the most dedicated clients that you could ever wish for. Really, nothing is too much. They're extremely invested in their dog's behavior. I think sometimes in being that, or in getting perhaps a little bit too granular, we forget to give our pets that control, that choice, and that agency, completely inadvertently and, with absolute no malintention. But we can get a little bit like that. I think by us wanting to control the situation, we take away their control, and that can be really negative for mental and emotional health. As we're also learning in these times, I mean, the whole idea of control, choice, and agency has also been put into question at the moment, right? For me, for us, for the GCC, for many other countries, we're not in control of what's going on at the moment. Our choice has been reduced. International travel isn't as easy as it was. I can't just hop on a plane and travel to see my family. So those have been some of kind of the big things that I've been thinking about. But then obviously also in thinking about those, you try and think about, well, what are actually some of the things that we can influence? How can we create better safety and predictability, certainly for our pets, and certainly when we're not living in a time of crisis, but just in our everyday interactions with them. And so I just thought I'd kind of chat through a couple of things there, because I think these words, they can be so abstract, right? And sometimes it can be very difficult to match those with any kind of practical implementations or how actually to provide safety and predictability. That they can seem really big things, and sometimes that can feel also a little bit overwhelming for caregivers if they're not sure. But it's actually not that tricky, and there are so many small ways in which we can provide a lot of these things. And I think safety is a huge one. And just ensuring that the pet, whether that's a dog or a cat or a horse or a rabbit, whether ensuring that they have areas within their environments and their homes that they can retreat to feel safe. And I think there are a few things that are involved here. One of them is obviously the kind of the physical dimensions of what that looks like. And I'll often ask caregivers, if they're not sure, where does your dog or cat take themselves to naturally if they're feeling worried about something? Where's a place within the home that they would naturally choose? And in some cases, that's really, really clear. It can be under a certain bed or in a certain wardrobe or under a coffee table or on a bed, on the sofa or something like that. But in other cases, it's not that clear, and you start to understand that there maybe isn't a safe place or a bolt hole or a place that pet can safely go to. And sometimes those places that they might choose end up no longer being safe, because when they're in those safe places, we might have kids coming past and kind of grabbing in there and patting them and kind of cuddling them. Or, we have social conflict that arises because they're being asked to move away from that safe place that they've chosen to get a bigger sense of safety. And, the caregiver's trying to maybe coax them out. Maybe it's well-intentioned, or maybe they just don't want them to be there, or it's inconvenient for them to be there. So we then get into this sort of state of social conflict between the animal and what their true wants and needs are, but also their desire to appease their family, their humans, and we get this kind of social conflict. So understanding where your animal might go to in order to seek more safety, I think that's a big thing. And then not trying to get them out of that place of safety, but rather trying to understand why it is that they're not feeling safe, and helping to kind of readdress some of those things. So it's almost a bit of a diagnostic tool as well as a therapeutic tool. So the more time they spend in that bolt hole, perhaps the less comfortable they feel with the remainder of their environment, but also making sure that they always have access to that safe place is a really important piece. We know cats, for example, one of their main coping mechanisms for feeling fear, anxiety, stress is to hide. And so we always want to make sure that we give them enough opportunities to be able to hide in. So that's a little bit around safety. So yeah, I have a couple of clients where, we've identified really clear sort of little bolt holes. I've got one client whose dog under the bed is his safe place. I have another really great client who actually did an episode with me. I think episode 99 it was, Tanya and Bruno. So if you listen to that, Bruno decides to take himself off into the basement. So he's noise phobic or noise fearful. And whenever there are loud noises, he takes himself off into the basement, because that's where he can hear the least amount. There are no windows down there, and he kind of gets himself down in the basement. Now, initially, he spent 23 hours out of the day in that basement, which then also wasn't necessarily a good thing. Yes, he had a safe place he could go to, and he was allowed to go there. But then that seems quite extreme for him to want to spend literally the entire day down there, and paired with other sort of signs of fears and phobias. He was, trembling, hypersalivating, didn't want to come out to eat, drink, eliminate, all those sorts of things. So again, that's where we strike that balance between, well, yes, it's good that they have that safe place, but is it context specific, and is it an appropriate amount of time that they spend there? So yeah, a little bit of a diagnostic and therapeutic tool. And yeah, just making sure that, we provide those moments where they can feel safe, but also listen to them when they communicate with us where those areas might be. Predictability is an interesting one, and I think there are so many different factors that we can look at from a predictability point of view. So absolutely, we've got environmental predictability, which perhaps isn't always that predictable, especially if we're living in urban environments and, you know, we go out on walks and we might encounter triggers and they're not predictable. And then the other thing that we have is social predictability. How predictable are the interactions with either humans, the humans that I live with, or perhaps the other pets or animals that I live with? And, you know, how does that influence my mental and emotional health? And again, there are a number of things that we can do to help increase predictability. So pattern games are a brilliant tool here. So pattern games often provide that structure and that predictability when there is no predictability in the environment. So teaching a pattern game, which could be something like, I'm going to give one example, the 1, 2, 3 game. So 1 predicts 2, 2 predicts 3, and 3 predicts that there's a positive reinforcer coming. So we train it so that at any moment where the environment seems a little bit unpredictable, we're able to build in that predictability piece by running through our 1, 2, 3 treat. It could also be a look at me cue. It could also be a hand target or a nose target. You know, there are so many different things that it could be. It could be taking a Super Bowl game out on the street so that we have different games and exercises that we can play in unpredictable environments. So there are ways that we can build in predictability. And of course, you know, social predictability is really, really important. And that sometimes also has to do a little bit with safety and attachment styles. You know, how confident are our pets that we are going to be predictable in our interactions with them. So if you allow your dog to hop up on the sofa 8 times out of 10, but then there'll be 2 times where, you know, they're punished for hopping up on the sofa, that's unpredictable. And that starts to then evoke conflict. Or if dogs are punished for something that they can't understand, a classic example here is, you know, perhaps there's been an elimination accident in the home. Caregiver comes home, but 4 hours after that elimination accident happened and then scolds the animal for that. And all of a sudden, there's zero predictability about homecomings and interactions in general. So those social predictability pieces are really, really important. And as mentioned, I think they have a huge effect also on attachment styles, separation-related behaviors potentially. So it's quite a big piece. And then we move on to control, choice, and agency. And I think the control piece is really interesting because I do believe that we control the majority of our pets' lives. Maybe not so much our cats that are maybe outdoor cats or indoor-outdoor cats, and they have a lot of their own control, choice, and agency, which is so important to them, especially, you know, being able to come in and out through cat flaps, you know, being able to explore their environment, have that kind of agency and control. But certainly our animals that more or less live inside a home with us for the majority of the time, everything is controlled, from the time that they feed to what they eat to how they eat, whether they're fed from a bowl or from a puzzle toy. We even control whether they're able to reproduce or not. We control when they go for a walk, where they go for a walk, who they interact with potentially. So there is a lot of control that we do effect on our pets' lives. And I think dogs here are particularly probably implicated, I guess. So what are some things that we can build into their lives to give them back some of that control? And that can be as simple as them leading the way on a walk, obviously, as long as it's safe to do so. But allowing them to choose the route, allowing them to forwards, backwards, zigzag. Obviously, if they can be off leash in that time and they're able to kind of zoom in and out of the woods and it's safe to do so, that's great, right? That gives them all of those 3 things: control, choice, and agency. And we always have to obviously be restricted by safety and other bits and bobs there. But, Yeah, thinking about some of those things. So here in the UAE, for example, we are only supposed to leash walk our dogs. So it's really difficult to give them any kind of off-leash time. If it is off-leash time, it might be in a dog park, and the interactions there are not always predictable, right? So there's that predictability piece there that might be missing. So, but having them on a long leash, for example, where they have a little bit more sense of agency and they can move very freely. I think, taking a dog out for a walk and having them walk in just straight lines and always literally to heel right next to you, that's something, again, that, we're kind of affecting that control. If we're practicing, for an obedience test or something, that's a different story. But if it's just an everyday, this is my life and I get to have some control here, that's a really great thing to do. What about choice and agency? So again, we don't often give choice. We don't often give choice in maybe the toys that they choose, the food that they eat. And sometimes that has really good reason. Maybe we've got dogs that are on restricted diets or special veterinary formulated diets. But there are, again, a couple of things that we can build in. So one of the things that we do a lot for dogs who perhaps don't feel they have a lot of choice, and then that can sometimes also come out in frustration, is just offer little things like a tasting platter. So, you get a little muffin tray, you pop in a couple of different safe food items. That could be a little bit of scrambled egg, a little bit of cottage cheese, a little bit of a few blueberries, or, then maybe something really yummy like a little bit of fish. And you just allow them to kind of sniff all the different things and then make their own choice as to what they might want to consume first. So that choice piece is a really, really important one. Choice to move away, choice to say no to interactions, choice also to be heard in certain situations, also really, really important. So at the veterinary clinic, giving them choice to move away, giving them the choice to engage with a snuffle box or a snuffle mat or something like that. Yes, of course, we need to get the job done. And yes, of course, we're going to be using distraction and luring as a big part of that, but allowing them also to communicate how they're feeling is really important, and for us to listen to that. Giving them choice over their toys, giving them choice over resting places, as long as that is, appropriate and we don't get guarding of certain resting areas. So all those things are important. And I think agency, so choice and agency as well, is, perhaps if you're training with your dog or if you're doing tricks, understanding when they say no, or when they opt out of maybe a training or an activity that you guys might be doing together, giving them a voice as well and allowing them to be sort of part of the relationship is really, really important. So those were a few things that kind of came up for me. And I've been trying to build some of these into also my patients that have struggled over the last weeks. Bruno's actually doing super well. We're managing. He does go down to the basement when we have the loud booms here. But he's definitely up, and around for the majority of the time. He's only in the basement for a little while, and we've managed that really well with also anti-anxiety medications. So, first aid medications when there are these really sort of extreme and out of the norm situations can also be really useful. But yeah, definitely sort of building some of those strategies in, keeping blinds closed, playing calming music, shielding from threatening noises, increasing that kind of sense of safety, distraction, play, cuddles, thunder shirts. There are a number of things that we can do to increase safety. But I think it's really important to understand what a basic need is. And if you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then right at the bottom, that foundational piece is to do with safety and, feeling safe and secure. Because if that piece is missing, everything else falls apart. And I've literally seen all the F's on display in the last few weeks, some both in the people and in the pets, how they've responded differently to to a threatening time or to a threatening environment. You know, some fight. I think I'm probably fall in that category. Some take flight, leave the country. I mean, I had a few friends, colleagues, even business associates that were literally on the next flight out. And that's absolutely okay. Freeze, I've definitely seen lots of freeze behaviors in a number of people around me, and probably also fiddle behaviors, you know, just kind of trying to do anything to make sense of what's happening around you. And so that's been a very clear reflection of how our pets feel. It's been amplified by the situation in the humans around me, but I think I see it a lot in my patients, certainly on an everyday, this is just their life all the time basis. And that is a hard way to live. So, like I said, a little bit philosophical, a little bit kind of buzzwordy, although very, very important. And I think especially where we've got patients with generalized anxiety disorders or that have anxiety, these things all become even more important. You know, that whole idea of predictability, knowing what comes next. I mean, we know how good dogs are at predicting things the other way, right? If they're scared of the doorbell or somebody coming to the door, they really quickly predict that the doorbell means somebody's coming to the door. They also really quickly then predict when the phone that signals the delivery driver that's about to come to the door goes off. So they are so good at building associations, and they're really good at building kind of associations that we don't want them to build. So we want to turn that around and actually build positive associations that they can feel safe from. So that whole association, kind of many steps backwards, is something that dogs are really good at. So we should definitely make use of that and really give them the opportunity to be able to predict and consistently predict, for the most part, what is going on around them and what's happening in their environment. Okay, that was the philosophical one. It's a conversation I had with the client of mine who I mentioned earlier. And yeah, she was great. She really took it on board. And I think she could herself see how by trying to really be so amazing at managing her dog's behavior, she had taken away some of these pieces, especially kind of the control of the choice and the agency. So it can sometimes be an interesting conversation also to have with caregivers. But yeah, I will leave it there. I hope that's given you some food for thought. I'm sure many of you are already building this into your treatment plans and are building this into your recommendations that you give caregivers. If you're a caregiver listening, think a little bit about how you can introduce some of these things into your pet's everyday life. I think, like I say, with cats, it's potentially a little bit easier, but dogs are certainly the ones I think that are maybe most affected here. Try and be socially predictable, have a predictable relationship with your dog. Try and be as consistent as you can. Don't get mad at him for doing something one day that you're absolutely fine with him doing for the rest of the time. So yeah, just think about some of those pieces. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it's given you something to think about. And yeah, I hope everyone's safe where they are in the world. And we hope this mess is over very, very soon. And I look forward to seeing you next week for episode 129. Bye for now.